take mitochondrial enhancing supplements, learn how to eat so your blood sugar doesn't crash, and you can be more conscious. And then you can have less pain and you can evolve and you can not age and you can do all the good stuff. So you understand that in a way that not a lot of people do, but biochemical fear is a great explanation for it. I call it physiological anxiety. It's like, no, your body's stressed because you're treating it like shit. You could fix that.
Chris Palmer's book, Brain Energy, espoused this so beautifully of like, he's a psychiatrist at Harvard and truly believes based on his research that every neurodegenerative, neurodevelopmental, and mental health issue are fundamentally rooted in mitochondrial dysfunction.
You're listening to The Human Upgrade with Dave Asprey.
You're listening to The Human Upgrade with Dave Asprey. Today, I want to talk about metabolic health. Not like I haven't talked about it, 500 times out of 1,200 episodes. But the reason that I keep coming back to this and sharing more with you is that when your metabolism works, you can live way longer than you're supposed to. You can become a nicer person, or more importantly, a kinder person. You can be more conscious. You can be less sick. You can have less pain. And you can handle things in the world that otherwise would feel like they were overwhelming. So you want to be limitless. This is what we do. So I found someone unique and interesting to chat with today because, yeah, you might hear me say mitochondria a few times in almost every episode. There's a reason, but Dr. Casey Means is a Stanford-trained physician, a leader in the field of precision health, and she's a co-founder in one of my favorite biohacking companies called Levels. Her brother, Callie Means, was on the show back in March where we talked about a new blueprint for fixing the American food and pharma system. Just a quick summary of that. The food and pharma system should not have any interaction with each other in a healthy country. And if you'd like to learn more about that, listen to episode 1146, because today's episode is a companion to that episode, or I guess you could say a sister episode, more to speak. Dr. Casey, welcome back to the show.
Dave, thank you so much for having me.
Back in 2021, you came on and you shared the best and worst foods for your metabolism, which I really appreciated. And today, because you have a new book called Good Energy, by the way, what a great name for a book, that talks about what decisions you make in lifestyle and what it does for your energy. Like, that's biohacking, right? Ground zero. Change the environment around you so you have control of your own biology. And the lifestyle is some of the stuff going on outside and inside of you. So thanks for writing a cool book focusing on energy first, because that's how the world actually works.
That's right. I mean, we could not be more aligned, Dave. You know, being in the healthcare system for almost 15 years, really the awakening I had was that it all comes down to metabolism. We have an obscene number of specialties in the Western medical system. I think at this point we're over 100. And most of the conditions I think that most of the doctors in those over 100 specialties are treating are fundamentally rooted in metabolism. And yet we get the most basic cursory overview of it in medical school, even at the, quote, best institutions in the country. And this is an absolute scandal. It needs to be the forefront of how we think about health, how we think about the body, how we think about prevention and treatment. And it's not. It's the biggest blind spot in the Western healthcare system, which of course is why the more we invest, the sicker we're getting. We're not focusing on the right problem. So I'm absolutely with you. And that's why I had to write this book and leave being an ear, nose, and throat doctor to focus on what's really happening inside all those little cells that create the problems that we play whack-a-mole with in our conventional system.
Do you ever feel a little bit schizophrenic? Like, I'm a Stanford-trained physician, and here you are talking about energy and metabolism. Like, how dare you?
Yeah, I do sometimes, because it takes, a lot to stand up, to an industry that's so big and so prestigious and controlling so much of our lives, and to say, like, actually, I think you're wrong. I think you're focusing on the wrong issue. But to me, like, this all came down to actually doing what everyone's telling us to do right now, which is follow the science. You see this plastered on billboards now. If we follow the science, if we actually go into PubMed and read about the pathophysiology of what's leading to most chronic conditions and symptoms, we go straight to metabolism. That's what the papers actually show. We are just, in a funny way, putting on these weird goggles when we go to the science and reading sort of more about the downstream effects of all this problems. But when you put on a different lens, it's just like, what are the invisible things happening inside of cells that actually lead to these symptoms that we treat? And if you follow the science, it takes you straight to metabolism. It takes you to what I call in the book, the trifecta of bad energy, which is mitochondrial dysfunction, oxidative stress, and chronic inflammation, which is the tornado of dysfunction that ultimately leads to metabolic dysfunction, which underpins almost everything that we ail from today. And I think a real invitation I have for doctors and people, but really everyone, is go into PubMed, go into Google, and start to actually Google your symptom or your disease, your diagnosis with those words after it. Mitochondrial dysfunction, oxidative stress, chronic inflammation. What you will find is a lot. And yet we don't learn about it.
Google is not a useful search engine for anything related to health. About 3 years ago, they stopped listing any of the websites that I use for trustworthy info, and they're truly unreliable. So that's a search engine I do not use for any of my health research anymore. They've lost the plot. It's no longer a way to find the world's knowledge. It's a way to find really a very select lens on knowledge that's filtered through both big pharma and through some weird woke stuff that they've done with their AI stuff. It's truly scary. I don't need a sensor built into my search engine. Thank you very much.
So true. Yeah. So scratch the but I think in PubMed, I think it's like if you search migraine.
Oh God, yeah.
And just look at what's out there, you're going to get a lot of papers about pharmaceuticals for migraine. If you search migraine and mitochondrial dysfunction, you're going to get a lot more interesting stuff and actually about what's really happening.
My protocol for fixing migraines as soon as they start happening, which I had to hone quite a lot when I was married for a long time with someone who had a lot of migraines. I've had a few, but it's amazing. You just upregulate mitochondrial function, and much of the time they resolve in minutes.
Yeah.
And here they are giving you all these crazy drugs, which sometimes are helpful, but for God's sake, sometimes sugar and 3 shots of espresso right away will upregulate mitochondria function enough. And maybe throw an aspirin in there. And what do you know? That's a cocktail that's worked up for a long time for migraines. And then you do the other big mitochondrial biohacks, and suddenly maybe you don't need $1,000 injectable drug. And the fact that we don't do both as available options, it drives me crazy. And just knowing that means you are free to look at a book like Good Energy and say, maybe I should have some good energy and maybe I'll do something else. But just knowing it's possible is profoundly important. If I'd have known that when I was 19, when I really was sick, I probably wouldn't have spent $2 million on getting well and then on reversing my age and all of that. I'm kind of glad that I got to do it, but I would have rather just looked it up online and gotten quick instructions from an AI bot, which is why I'm releasing one like that.
Love that.
But walk me through your path. Stanford-trained, they taught you there's, anyone who has more than 3 symptoms is probably crazy, and here's all the drugs and here's all the flow charts and how dare you think and all the things they do. How did you break out of that personally?
Yeah, for me, I think it culminated in a moment that I remember vividly, which is when I was in the operating room. I was about 29 years old. I was 4 years out of medical school, and so I'd become a doctor at like 26, had gone to surgical residency to become a head and neck surgeon. And I was just about to launch after residency to become sort of the independent faculty surgeon and start making the money and doing well. And I'm standing over this woman, a patient who I'd become quite close with. And we're in the operating room and she's on the table. It's her 3rd revision sinus surgery. She has all the other issues. She has prediabetes. She has a little bit of overweight, borderline obesity. She's got arthritis. She's got a little bit of depression because her sinus symptoms are always plaguing her. Just kind of the average typical American patient. A little bit of this, a little bit of that. She's got some sinus issues. We're going to go in there. We're going to bust open a hole in her skull, suck out pus, send her on her way, all feel good about our day. And I'm standing there, this naked, unconscious patient in front of me who I really care about. And I'm just thinking like, are we really going to go through this charade again where I'm going to do this surgery? We're going to bill tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. We're going to send her out of the post-op area and really think that we've done anything to make this patient actually healthier. All her other issues, which I am systematically trained to ignore, right? Her prediabetes, her arthritis, her depression, her obesity, not my lane. And we all know she's gonna come back. She's gonna have the sinus issues again. We're giving her some time. We're doing some plumbing, but we are not healing. And I just, standing there, I just felt this deep sense of honestly being a little bit of a fraud. Like, I am so deep in this training, 9 years, 4 years of medical school, 5 years of residency. And a couple things were so clear to me in that moment. I don't really know why she's sick. I don't really know why she's sick. I don't really know how to heal this patient. I know how to diagnose, drug, cut, and bill. And that's not what I'm here to do. And I think there was something about being ready to launch and do this very independently, you know, and to start really raking in big money for this, that I thought, this is not what I came here to do. And I've always been interested in nutrition and food. I lost a lot of weight when I was a teenager, almost 70 pounds, just by learning literally about the power of real food and eating real food. And so I always have known that food is powerful. I studied nutrigenomics in college, and I realized, you know, all these conditions we're treating as an ENT, everything's inflammatory. Sinusitis, laryngitis, thyroiditis, otitis, cellulitis, parotitis, it's all itises, it's all inflammation. And yet I have no idea what causes inflammation. There's something wrong with that. I've heard this term anti-inflammatory diet. I know that certain food compounds are anti-inflammatory from back in my nutrigenomic days, and yet this is nowhere to be found in my surgical training or the guidelines that I'm practicing under. And I think there was a part of me that said, if there is anything I could possibly be doing to keep this patient out of the operating room, it's so dramatic to drill into someone's skull, to cut into their neck. I gotta figure that out. And actually from that moment on, I almost couldn't operate anymore. Like, I literally was like, I felt wrong in some way. Like, I need to figure out if there's anything we could be doing to keep people out of the operating room. That was the start of the Pandora's box. Then, of course, you start diving into the true root causes of why people are sick, going down that rabbit hole of inflammation, and it leads you to mitochondrial dysfunction and to metabolic health, and you just can't go back. And then once you go down that road and realize, wait a minute, it's actually very simple to reduce inflammation. It's actually very simple to improve metabolic health. And yet the whole business model of the industry I'm operating under is that innovation and complexity and specialization is the answer. And the only reason we're not getting well is because we're not spending enough money and there's not enough access to healthcare and we're just not advanced enough. We need more CRISPR and immunotherapy and all this stuff. The secret that I really feel like I was born to tell is that actually being healthy is so much simpler than we've been led to believe. And the industry profits off our confusion and this buying into the sense of complexity. And so that was sort of from the patient to the bigger picture, how I ended up putting down my scalpel, leaving the surgical world, quitting dramatically from my residency program and devoting my life to the true reasons why people are sick and how to help people actually heal. And that, of course, led me to be a metabolic warrior, to co-found Levels, and to ultimately write this book and try and get this message out. So really a foot soldier in the work that you've been doing for years. And but I don't think we can have enough voices and messengers sharing this information.
Think of your body like a high-powered machine. Each part of it needs just the right amount of oil or tension in order to work the right way. Good blood flow is one of the most important things your human body needs. Without it, your organs get starved of the nutrients and oxygen they need to work well. Good news, Calroy Health Sciences 2 supplements can help. Both are backed by really legit research. Arterosil HP protects the fragile inner lining of every blood vessel in your body, and Vasconox HP provides nitric oxide support for up to 24 hours as measured by an open-label published study. If you're ready to amp up your vascular game and keep your body moving, go to calroy.com/Dave for a special deal. You remind me of one of my mentors and teachers and a friend, Dr. Tim Guilford, many years ago in Palo Alto. He was a Johns Hopkins trained ENT surgeon, and same thing. He said, my patients keep coming back. They weren't getting better, so I quit. And he went on this healing odyssey around the world and learned homeopathy and auto-injection, and was the first guy to sell liposomal glutathione many years ago. So he's the one who helped me figure out that toxic mold was behind my symptoms before we had any information about what mold really does.
Yeah.
And you find a guy who's, could have had a $1 million a year great career as a surgeon, and said, no, I'm going to do stuff that makes people well. And it's not the easy path. So thanks for just standing up and saying, let's do it. And showing people, oh, wow, can you track the health of your metabolism by looking at your blood sugar and seeing, the body's not using your blood sugar, so it's building up. I wonder why. Maybe we can fix that. Like, it's a data-driven, it's true science, but it does take a very different way of thinking. So it's funny, you work with your brother. You decided to write a book with him. How's it working with a family member to write a book? I kind of think that would be hell.
We always joke about the fact that our next book is going to be about siblings. We're going to unpack this sibling relationship because it's a fascinating relationship, right? Like, I don't know about you, but I don't know a single adult who doesn't have some interesting thing to say about their relationship with their siblings. And I actually am fascinated by the whole relationship because, like, you come into this universe as a conscious being through like this shared portal, I mean, there's lots of different ways to be siblings, but we share the same mother, and, you're kind of self-assembled and 3D printed in this same portal, and brought into this world. And then you are born into the same family with totally different brains and are having different experiences. And I think in many ways, a sibling can be your absolute best teacher because you're here on this journey for some reason together. And I think that it's been, so big picture, it's been a fascinating journey to work with my brother. I have so much respect for him and his intellect and the way he sees the world. And but fundamentally, the reason we came together on this project is because it was to honor my mother. And, we shared an experience that weaves throughout the whole book, which is that we lost my mother far too early to the end stages of metabolic disease, that really the blind spots of our opportunistic, exploitative healthcare system, the intentional blind spots to root cause physiology, allowed for everyone within this system to ignore the connecting points between what she had racked up over 30, 40 years of her adult life that ultimately led to her death. And, I think through a different structure of our system where we actually are thinking about the connections between diseases, there were dozens of points where she could have had a different outcome. And we really don't want that for other people who are going through a similar situation to my mom, where they are dependent, loyal, and faithful to this system that they believe in and ultimately let down by it, which is, I think, how most people feel today. We are both dependent on the system and we are certainly not being, truly benefited by it. And we know that because Americans are getting sicker every year. We are literally getting sicker. For every marginal dollar spent on healthcare in the United States, people are getting sicker. This is the definition of an unsustainable, ineffective system. And yet we don't really think that we have a better option, which of course we absolutely do. It's outside the system. And the point that Callie and I really have to make in the book is that, sure, trust the system on acute issues. You have a trauma, a broken bone, you need emergency surgery. The system, we thrive. American healthcare thrives on that. But right now, 90% of healthcare costs are going towards chronic, acquired, lifestyle-rooted diseases. And unfortunately, the system has abjectly failed on the prevention, treatment, or management of chronic diseases. And we know this because they are all exploding all at once the more we spend. And so this book, this coming together, Callie and I came to this experience from different places. He was in policy and business, and at one point was a lobbyist for food and pharma. And so he saw things that way. I, of course, was a doctor and sort of had my awakening about root cause issues. And then we both experienced this just tragic situation with my mother where no one put the pieces together for her throughout 40 years. And then the entire system sprang into action when she was lethally sick with a stage 4 pancreatic cancer diagnosis,
right,
basically trying to, squeeze as much out of my mom in terms of profit as possible in her last 2 weeks of life. And in horror and disgust, we decided we were going to devote the next 3 years of our life to writing this book. And so, just to briefly share what sort of happened with her, she had me when she was 40. I was 12 pounds. I was a huge baby, which is a fetal macrosomic baby, which of course was probably a sign that she was developing insulin resistance. That fetal macrosomia is a sign that both the mother and baby are going to have metabolic issues, which both of us did. I was, obese by the time I was in 8th grade, and she had a lot of trouble losing baby weight. She then got the standard diagnosis: high blood pressure, high cholesterol, high blood sugar, statin, ACE inhibitor, metformin. Everyone just said, you're getting older, you're postmenopausal, this is part of the journey. And then she's 71 years old and she has stomach pain. She gets the CT scan. She has stage 4 pancreatic cancer and she's dead 13 days later. And at the time, she was seeing doctors at Stanford. She was seeing quote unquote best doctors in the world. And all of them literally stared us in the eye and said, we're so sorry. This was so unlucky. And we knew enough to know, like, this was not unlucky. This was totally predictable, because through that root cause goggles, each of these conditions, a large baby, weight loss resistance, high cholesterol, high blood sugar, high blood pressure, and even cancer, are all branches of the same tree of fundamental metabolic dysfunction. And if anyone in that entire system had known how to actually focus all the effort she was doing and the cost she was spending on the mitochondria, I think we'd had a different outcome. So that's really the message that we're spreading, and also trying to spread some awareness about, the healthcare system. Sure, it has produced miracles, but when it comes to these chronic illnesses that are torturing our lives, it's not doing well. And we really need to learn to trust ourselves and to learn how to manage and track our own metabolic health. And the system's not catching up fast enough. So we gotta really understand that this is a system that unfortunately profits off our dependency and sickness. And it's a system that makes more money when we're sick and not when we're healthy. And that's not to scare anyone, but it's the simple economic reality that we all need to be aware of if we're going to live our healthiest lives. So that's what brought us together to write this book together, and it's been the journey of a lifetime.
Well, you're doing some good in the world. That's what I think, and I guess I should disclose this to you guys. I am an investor in Levels and advisor since the early days, the CGM stuff. Just so that maybe I have a financial interest for saying that. I don't. I just like to put my money where my mouth is, because I think having straight information, unfiltered, about how my body's working gives me more power. So I love it that I can do that without having to go beg for a monitor from a doctor, because it doesn't make sense.
No. And right now, that's the situation a lot of people are in. Like, the way the system works right now is we're actually like kind of begging for breadcrumbs about our own health information. And in 22 American states, patients don't even own their own healthcare records. The doctor or the hospital does. This is a system that often is justified to like patient data security, or the fact that patients are going to make bad decisions if they have their data. But actually, the real data shows that the opposite is true. The more information people have about their own biomarkers, they do far, far, far better. So what's created is this systemic information gap and mismatch between the doctor and the patient that unfortunately can be exploited. Because if you have a patient who doesn't understand their own body and doesn't understand the feedback between the choices they're making every day and what's actually happening in their biology, then they're kind of spinning. They're investing, but they're not making progress. They become dependent on the system. And that's just really what we need to subvert, obviously, because people who are empowered with their own data and can close the loop between what they're doing and how it's impacting them can cut through so much of the noise out there and just focus on what really matters. And you get the fun, I'm not going to say funniest, you get a lot of pushback against this concept. I'm sure you've received a lot of this too, because you've been such a vocal advocate for personal data, but people will say, oh, this will cause obsession. This will cause people to be obsessed with their data, and they're going to become orthorexic, and they're going to become stressed out about it. But I would say we've actually seen a very different picture, which is that there is so much noise right now in the health space. There are doctors saying one thing, the ADA saying another thing. You've got health influencers, you've got books, you've got podcasts. There's wars going on. And people get very confused, and it makes them doubt their choices, which is a huge cognitive overload. People are afraid to eat a lot of different things. And a real message is like, you don't actually need to trust anyone but yourself. But you do need to understand how to interpret what your body is telling you. And you can do that actually very simply in this modern age with two things. One is analog, one is technological. Analog is like, learn to interpret your symptoms.
How do I feel?
How do I feel? And in this crazy distraction industrial complex of our modern world where we've just put productivity and consumerism at the top, like we are all so damn busy that people just don't even have a second to sit and just hear their bodies talking to them all the time through their symptoms. So step one, a point of the book is just like slow down, understand this multidimensional matrix that we're all living in and buying into, and realize that like a big part of your health journey is actually just like doing things in the world and then listening to how your body is feeling, looking, what is the experience. Step two is obviously technological, which is like in the past 5 years, we have these trends converging that are incredibly wonderful. We have direct-to-consumer lab testing, things like Function Health and Inside Tracker and others. We've got biowearables like continuous glucose monitors and more coming down the pipeline. And then we've got, of course, the other wearables, the Auras, the Whoops, the Fitbits, all these things that can give us these real-time feedback. And so if we can learn to understand the numbers and then the subjective experience and then try things on and just be able to prove to ourselves, like, is it working or not, we can cut through all the confusing noise that keeps us spinning and feeling paralyzed. And so I actually think for so many of our Levels members, it has cut through the stress to actually get them to a place of feeling a lot of ease with, hey, yeah, I can eat this and I can take a walk afterwards. Or like, I know that if I put some more fiber on this, like it'll help. And so I think reducing the cognitive overhead is actually the end result.
Most cookware and appliances contain toxic forever chemicals. That's why at my home, I use cookware from Our Place. This is a mission-driven company that makes kitchen products that look really good, but they're designed to be healthy and sustainable. No PFAS, no PTFE or Teflon. It turns out that most nonstick pans today have PFAS, and globally, environmentalists and people who care about human health are saying we've got to stop. The European Union plans to prohibit PFAS by 2025, but especially in the US, most cookware brands continue to use those forever chemicals because they're cheap. I like Our Place cookware because it's always been PFAS-free, and it's got durable, toxin-free ceramic coatings that really work, so I know it's safe when I cook and it doesn't stick. There's another reason you might want to go back to using Our Place cookware instead of fancy appliances, because you'll find PFAS in air fryers, pressure cookers, crock pots, even the rim of blenders. Our Place has non-toxic appliances and more than 75,000 five-star reviews and mentioned the New York Times, Bon Appetit, and a lot more. In order to live a long time and feel better along the way, you need to eliminate forever chemicals from your kitchen. This is a real problem. So upgrade to Our Place today and give it a try. Go to FromOurPlace.com, use code Dave, and they'll give you 10% off everything. You also get a 100-day trial and free shipping and returns. That's FromOurPlace.com, use code Dave. Think about it. Every time I eat oatmeal, I get a bigger blood sugar spike than ice cream. Maybe oatmeal isn't health food. And I get a little, actually it makes me laugh. You get these people who are saying, well, if you have access to information about your health, it might make you obsess on it. Therefore, I won't let you have it.
Right.
Let's see. I didn't hire my doctor or my government to be my daddy because I'm a grown-ass adult.
Yeah.
And if I'm going to choose to obsess over something, I would rather obsess over my health information than your stupid social media algorithms or your big pharma ads that are designed to create obsession.
Right.
So anyone who says they're doing it for your own safety is pretty much telling you that they think you're stupid.
That's right.
And no, I'm in charge of my own safety. And that's why I would like to have access to my metabolic data. And if someone tries to stop me, I ignore them because my metabolism is mine. And I didn't sell it to anyone, and I'm not going to. And I think Levels has done a great job because maybe it's heavy metals, maybe it's a toxin, maybe it's just because you eat vegan stuff that you think is health food, but is highly processed industrial food. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. Or maybe it's just trauma. Whatever it is, does it show in your blood sugar? It's a measure. Does it show on your Oura ring, on your heart rate variability? And that's the game you're playing. How do I make those numbers better? Via any means necessary. And if you just do that, magically your risk of Alzheimer's, diabetes, cancer, cardiovascular disease, those all go down, but you feel better and you have this weird thing called good energy, which is a great name for your book. Talk to me about the things that are stopping good energy, what you call bad energy in the book.
Unfortunately, the bad news, there's a lot of good news, but it's essentially every single aspect of our modern environment. And we unpack really all of them in the book. And there's really seven areas that I focus on, not to scare people, but because just like you, I believe that share the information and people can do with it what they would like to do. But when we're talking about the 7 pillars, it's our food system, it's the way we're relating to sleep, it's our emotional health and stress and sense of fear, it's our movement patterns, it's our relationship with light, it's our relationship with temperature, and then it's our relationship with toxins.
You sound like a biohacker, a lot like a biohacker. Oh my gosh.
I know.
Totally. That's a list of environmental inputs, right?
Right. I know. And so I think about everything I do is from, I think, really the perspective of compassion for our cells and our mitochondria. I believe my framing for the body is that we are miracles, each of us, and it's literally just the self-assembly of matter and energy. It's freaking incredible. That's constantly evolving and changing throughout our lifetime. And it's, our body's not a thing. Our body is a process where billions of cells are dying every day and being reborn. We're constantly 3D printing ourselves out of food. And at its base, our cells want to give us the happiest, healthiest, most thriving life ever and want us to reach our highest purpose and be joyful. And they will do that for you by and large if they get their needs met. And if they do not get their needs met, or they are overburdened by things that they do not need or can process properly, then we will have symptoms and we will have disease and we will have a less incredible time in this one precious conscious experience of life that we have. So how do we look at every sort of input around our bodies, this group of cells, this 40 plus trillion cells that we are essentially our consciousness, our agency in the world? The purpose of that is to create the conditions around that group of cells to meet their needs and not overburden them, and they will generate a beautiful life for us. And somehow we have forgotten all of that in our healthcare conversation. And so we think we can just toxify and poison the environment around our cells and everything will be fine and we can then drug our way out of it. That obviously doesn't make any sense. And so really the ask for people is to examine each of those pillars, and within each of those pillars, examine different aspects of it. So within sleep, for instance, we're talking not just about quantity, we're talking about consistency and we're talking about quality, because consistency, quality, and quantity all in the literature independently impact mitochondrial health and cellular health. So we've got to actually think through each of them and then think through all the different elements, psychological, physical, environmental, that are impacting those three things, and then take stock and improve. And then with food, of course, we're not just talking about a dietary pattern. We're talking about food quality and nutrient density, micronutrients, antioxidants, how we're supporting our microbiome. Are there pesticides on the food? How processed or not processed is it? A lot of different elements about food, and really, again, taking stock. And so that's how I kind of think about it is, let's go through each of these and understand where we stand, where we can improve. Let's make some changes and let's track it. And if you do that, you will move very quickly into the right direction, and you will know if you're meeting the needs of your cells, if you start feeling better, and if your biomarkers improve. And it's actually that simple. So it's, one of those things that it's simple but not necessarily easy. But if we at least know where to point the arrow of our effort, I think it can actually be a lot easier than it is for the average person today who's spinning and paralyzed.
What's the first step? As someone reads Good Energy, or they start doing what you're doing, where do you go? Because that's where the overwhelm happens. It's the just tell me what to do problem.
Yeah. So there's two answers to that, I think. For me, the practical answer, like where to start, I always go back to food. Because food, to me, it's just sort of unavoidable that we've got to get it right. And the reason for that is because we are 100% entirely 3D printed from food. We are 100% molecularly food. And
That's
the
not
average
true.
person, what's that?
30 pounds of air and like a couple pounds of food every day come together. We're not 3D printed out of food. We're 3D printed out of mostly water and air and a little bit of food.
But we take in water. We ingest water.
Right, exactly. But the food is a very tiny amount of it. Like, isn't air and water the primary ingredients?
But every single cell that you have, every fatty acid in your cell membranes, every protein that makes up the structural components of your body, every ACTG in our genetic code that gets reprinted every day, we are taking molecules. We ingest 50 to 70 metric tons of food in our lifetime. And those are molecules that go in and change over the molecules that are there now.
Oh, yeah. We're like a whirlpool through food when you think about it that way.
Precisely. Yeah. And so if we're taking in 50 to 70 metric tons of food in the lifetime, which is essentially, that is the ink, along with, of course, like water and some air, but like structurally, that is the ink to reprint, then you can't like totally, neglect that. And truly in the conventional healthcare system, doctors are telling patients with chronic diseases that food doesn't matter. And I think that the thing that just makes my mind explode is like this body, even the body that's receiving a medication they want to give, it's still in many ways made from food. So that's what I mean when I say, like, this is the version of you of next week will be molecularly different than the version of you today. And that difference, that delta, is much of that is molecules from food that we have. So would you disagree with that? Or
much of it is. I think a lot of the carbon in there does come from breathing as well, right? And it doesn't. We're carbon-based life forms. It's just that if you're food centric and you're breathing polluted air in a bad building and you're drinking tap water, even if you eat the right food, it doesn't work. So I kind of look at us as a mixture every day of energy and materials made from mixing air, food, and water. And you could say water is part of food, maybe. But either way, it's like they need to be clean and need to have the right components in them and not have the wrong components in them.
That's exactly right. Like, I think about, and I talk about in the book about how like health and eating, it's a matching problem. It's not there is a right answer for our bodies, because the good thing is we know enough about biochemistry and cellular biology to like have a really good sense of what our cells actually need from a molecule perspective to function. And
like statins, right? They need statins to function.
Right. That's going to just incorporate, it's like they have a structure. They have a functional milieu. And we actually do have a good understanding of that. And so when we think about food, we need to get off all the crazy, conversations about dogma about food and think like, are we matching the input that is the 2 to 3 pounds of molecular information we put into the body each day with what the cells actually need to function properly? And I think that, and when those things match, and it's a dynamic process, obviously, because we're changing every day, we have different needs each day. But when we generally match those two things and support maybe with extra nutrients when there are times of stress or whatever it is, what we will find is that the function gets better. And so how do we actually like make that simple for people? I think there's broad brush strokes that we can tell people, which is like eat real food from high quality soil that is unprocessed, that is not covered in synthetic toxins. And if you just simply start with that, you're going to get a lot farther than the average American who's eating ultra processed food covered in toxins that comes from poor soil. And therefore, the percentage of that 50 to 70 metric tons that's going in is just like devoid of molecules that will meet the needs of the cells. So that's kind of big picture. It's like, if you're not going to track anything, at least start with real food, unprocessed from good soil, not covered in toxins. And you'll get at least some of the way there, I think. And so really that matching problem and then tracking it over time is where I think about, at least for me, being someone who's really in awe of food, I think that's where I start. But the flip side of the other place to start, which I go back and forth, whether it's which one should come first, is in chapter 9 of the book, my favorite chapter, which is called Fearlessness, the highest level of good energy. Because
love it.
to me, it has to start also with the way we think about the body and the way we think about our potential in this lifetime and the way we conceptualize our true nature. Because if that's not there, if we're sort of building the whole journey of health on false constructs, like that we're limited or that we're just these material things that are going to live and die and that's all we have, and sort of if we kind of keep it really in that limited framework, it makes it a lot harder to make these decisions every day. So an ask I have for people in this journey is to actually like build this on a solid foundation, which I think starts with a sense of awe, and a sense of awe for this preciousness of this experience, the absolute statistical near impossibility of being alive as a Casey or a Dave, and to examine our relationship with fear in our lives, because the world really wants us to be afraid right now. Like basically the whole media is there to like try and keep us afraid so that they can then profit off our seeking solutions to our existential angst. And I think that for me, there's a few main buckets of what are causing us modern Westerners to be afraid. I think there's obviously the childhood stuff and the wounds and the things that create sort of deeply embedded hypervigilance and limiting beliefs throughout our lifetime. There is our media. There is the device in our hand that's streaming essentially terrorism into our eyeballs 24 hours a day and constantly making us feel like the world is unsafe, even though it's one of the safest times in human history that we know of to be alive. And the third, which I think is actually a big one that I would love to write a whole nother book about, is our fear of mortality. I think in the Western world, we have this fascinatingly sort of limited view of our relationship with cycles and nature and death. And we think we don't even talk about it. We're not curious. You think about so many other cultures, Stoics, Indigenous, Eastern, they all think about death. They all meditate on obsessively. They write poetry about it. We don't. We do not. We put people in boxes and bury them and we don't talk about it. And so to me, if we're truly, truly, truly going to be healthy and actually make the sustainable lifestyle choices, we need to go deep down that road of actually like knowing that we are limitless first, and then building the health journey on top of that to basically create this biochemical structure and form that can let us thrive in this human experience. And that's what drives me. And so an honoring and a respect of this opportunity. And so I would say between food and then more like esoteric fearlessness, I think those two are good places to start. But I'm curious about you, like, do you have a place that you think is like step one?
I kind of look at sleep as being the most important thing. Like if you were to just fix that, you're going to get more metabolic advantage and it's relatively affordable. But what you said about awe is the most important thing, right? And that's something that for me, neurofeedback is a big part of it. And things like Burning Man and going into nature and stuff like that is important. But for triggering awe brings gratitude. And when you have a state of awe plus gratitude, you can really get into those states where you're really hard to program, where your triggers are not available to be used against you. And that's kind of where freedom happens. And one of my companies is 40 years of Zen, which is 5 days to get the brain state of someone who spent decades meditating. And at the Biohacking conference, I'm actually announcing that we're adding a ketamine option on top of neurofeedback for the world's first ketamine-assisted neurofeedback program, because ketamine induces awe and gratitude and neuroplasticity in a new way, so that then you can take this whoa state and then you can use that to do that profound inner work. Because honestly, even if you're eating junk food, if you can just have constant gratitude and a state of awe, you're still going to be metabolically better off. I'd rather see you eat amazingly. And there's an executive chef there for a reason, because you can do more hard personal development work or more good energy work in the world when you make more energy.
Yes.
But if you make good energy and you're traumatized, angry, and scared all the time, it doesn't go anywhere good. So to your point in your book, you kind of have to have the mindset work. But to have the mindset work, you might want to have the metabolism work first, because it's easier that way, right?
Right. It's a lot easier to have awe for the world when you're well rested. Like there's no question about that. And or when you've like had nutritious food. And so it's like each of these pillars feels like an individual little baby in my mind. I'm like, oh my God, I don't know which one's my favorite. But I think it's a lot of people talk about, oh, we got to start with policy and we got to start with societal level things to make people healthy. And I always think, like, society is made of humans. Humans are made of cells. Cells are filled with mitochondria, and our mitochondria are broken. And so, like, there is a bottom up element of, like you said, when we are making more energy in our cells, we can make more good energy in the world. And so I think if people want to be a force for change in the world, they want to bring in a better future. Like, one of the best ways we can do that is to individually actually create more energy flowing through us in an unbridled way, which is metabolic health, right? Like, our bodies, our birthright is to be transformers of energy from outside of us and stored in carbon bonds to a form of energy that can help us be agents of change in the world. And so, like, nothing could be more of I think, a positive impact on our communities and families and world than just, like, actually investing in our metabolic health, because that is the base unit of a society, which right now is seemingly, kind of chaotic. And so that's just, I really hope people feel empowered in knowing that every time they're actually eating that food from the farmer's market, or getting a good night's sleep, or, choosing to tune out some of the programming media, like, it's like that is actually a really positive act for bringing in a higher frequency vibration, whatever, in the world, by literally just making more ATP, which is actually contributing to a better world. And it also, circling back to the ENT stuff, like, a big journey I had, sort of, which psychedelics were in some ways involved in this as well. It's like, just thinking about, like, wow, like, I spent 9 years treating inflammatory conditions, and, like, fundamentally, inflammation is biochemical fear. Like, it is the body being afraid of something. And that's really sad. Like, it's sad that most Americans, not only in their psychology, but in their bodies, are just expressing a war against something that we're not talking about. And, so when we actually focus on improving metabolic health, which is, like, the root cause of chronic inflammation, like, the body is fundamentally afraid of cells that are underpowered and can't do their work. And so if we're going to try and create a more thriving world, more thriving lives, we, with compassion, I think, need to help our cells feel safe. And that can be done both through what we're putting in them, what's around them, and also how we're thinking. And so, we get there's all this plausible deniability in healthcare, because we're all working our butts off, and all the surgeons are stressed and they're in debt, and everyone's spinning and working. And it's like, I wish everyone could just back up and say, like, fundamentally, we're dealing with people whose bodies are expressing biochemical fear. And so how do we actually get at that? And the healthcare system is 100% blind to that conversation.
You're into something really important there. This idea of biochemical fear. I believe, after looking at a lot of EEG brainwaves and doing a lot of trauma work and breath work and psychedelics and all the consciousness technologies, that a huge number of people who walk around saying, I'm anxious and depressed, it's not your thoughts. Your thoughts happen way too late. It was that your body was terrified because it's poisoned, because it's starving, because it doesn't have nutrients. And if it feels starving, it's going to pass that feeling onto you, and you're going to think it's real. And you're going to see an ad, and the ad's going to give you a reason. And you think, oh, it's because I don't have the right makeup. It's like, no, it's because your mitochondria aren't working.
That's right.
They're in the driver's seat of human consciousness. And you fix mitochondria and people wake up. And it's crazy how that happens. And it happens over and over. So most of your anxiety and depression or things like that, it sure feels like it's your mother-in-law or the mean boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever. And yes, those things are all real. It's just, if your mitochondria worked well, they wouldn't feel so big, because the anxiety is coming from within, and then you're getting a little bit of additional anxiety for something that feels like it's all external. And the awareness that comes from doing deep personal work, dude, take mitochondrial enhancing supplements, learn how to eat so your blood sugar doesn't crash, and you can be more conscious. And then you can have less pain, and you can evolve, and you can not age, and you can do all the good stuff. So you understand that in a way that not a lot of people do, but biochemical fear is a great explanation for it. I call it physiological anxiety. It's like, no, your body's stressed because you're treating it like shit. You could fix that.
Oh, I love the way you just said that. That's, I think what you're saying, I think it's like the most visceral, fundamental level that we have to talk about. Like, this is I love that about the thoughts being later, because things we know, like in science right now is that like depression, anxiety. I mean, Chris Palmer's book, Brain Energy, this espoused this so beautifully of like, he's a psychiatrist at Harvard and truly believes based on his research that every neurodegenerative, neurodevelopmental, and mental health issue are fundamentally rooted in mitochondrial dysfunction.
We're aligned on that.
We're aligned. And I'm surprised he's not being thrown out, right? Like fortunately, like he's able to communicate this in a way that doesn't totally polarize him from mainstream academia, which I think is really wonderful. But it's like, I think that this idea of the trickle up of like individual parts of us being afraid from this environment that no longer is in many ways conducive to human, like, I don't want to say life, but in some way, I mean, life expectancy is going down and infertility is going up, right? Like these things are not great signs. And somehow we're not seeing, you talk about like the IVF conversation, it's like, or sorry, the infertility conversation, it's like, it immediately goes to how incredible advancements in IVF are happening. And I think I want to just rip everyone out of their slumber and say, people, the body is telling us that it is so afraid of the environment that it will not create a new life. Why are we not seeing this? And then you look at the other end of the spectrum, like Alzheimer's dementia, and the body is saying, this environment is so inconducive to neurologic cell functioning that we're going to essentially stop making thought. Like we're going to set a sort of self-destruct on this consciousness level. It's all the same thing. It's all the cells expressing to us that this is not a safe world for them, and therefore we are going to retreat. And I think we have a moment right now in human history where we know enough to know what's happening on this invisible intracellular level, and we still do have agency, right? Like we still have enough brains working to be able to kind of get our way out of this, but we have to see it for what it really, we're not going to out-innovate, I think, our way out of this problem, because fundamentally I believe, this is my belief, that a lot of it's going to be solved by actually figuring out ways to bring what are more natural signals into our modern life. It's not about going back to all being agrarian farmers and living on farms, but it's like we do at some point need to figure out how to bring the signals that our cells need back into modernity, which means going outdoors like most of the time and being on our feet most of the time and eating real food from thriving soil most of the time. So the innovation is going to be actually, I think, how to bring the signals that are more traditional, which is essentially more natural signals, into our modern life in a way that's sustainable and affordable, not how do we technology the problem that we have. So I see investors and a lot of very smart people missing the mark on this, thinking that progress is actually technological innovation and more specialization, when in fact, I think we need to focus the arrow on actually how do we know what energetic and molecular signals our cells need to thrive. So how do we actually, which like are things like light and, clean air and things like that. And how do we actually bring those into modernity without totally going backwards? And so that's, anyone listening, I'm like, that's the challenge. That's what we need to focus on. How do we create office spaces that are, if we're going to work on computers, great, but like we got to do it outdoors, things like that.
It's a tough one. I mean, going back to everyone living in distributed agriculture, I built a regenerative farm over the last 10 years in Canada with sheep and pigs and cows and chickens. And it is more than a full-time job to do that.
Yeah.
It's just, that's probably not the life that most people want. So I don't have an issue with technology solutions. I mean, if you're going to set yourself up with an environment around you that supports your highest performance, it's either going to be nature or it's going to have all the signals and elements of nature that are healthy. So you want to go to Mars? Like I know some people in Elon's camp, and I've actually talked with the president or CEO of SpaceX about this. Like, how do you harden astronauts? Well, if you don't recognize that the environment is a part of being human, how are you going to build a spaceship that works?
Yeah.
So we're in a place where we don't, as a society, recognize all the inputs that our bodies are taking in, so we don't fix them. Once we recognize those, there's no reason you can't be indoors for your entire life and be super healthy and happy and satisfied, but it would require conscious design. And right now, we don't even acknowledge what the inputs are. And frankly, I don't really like that future, but I'd rather have that future. And I'd rather have that when I choose to be indoors than a future of prison-like cubicles in sealed buildings with recycled endocrine disrupting air and toxic lighting. Because frankly, like I'm the guy who's going to bring a glass cutter in at night and make a window in the skyscraper because I'm just not breathing that shit.
Totally.
And there are more than a few people like me out there. So for people in building design or trying to look at the future, one thing is maybe you can lower my mitochondrial function so much that I'll stop thinking and just be a good little zombie. I just wouldn't try it.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I really do appreciate that. Like there is a theoretical way to replicate everything from outdoors, like and bring it in, and that I imagine if all the energetic and molecular signals are the same, we could thrive. I think that a lot of this we don't talk about in this book, but I'm like, it's really interesting. Like we basically exist in a world where there's different types of energy. There's molecular energy, thermal energy, light energy, mechanical energy. There's all these different things that our bodies are experiencing, and those are all changed now, right? And so we either like create a world in which we get the right ones through innovation and technology, or we try and find them out, more naturally. But I think what you're talking about is like what doesn't work is like being indoors without the signals and thinking that we're going to be like healthy. We need to replicate or to just give the body those signals. And I think one of the stats in the meantime, when that's not necessarily at scale for people, like that we have the right lighting indoors and things like that.
Right.
A big like point I have, you write these 300-page books and you're like, what are the simple takeaways? And it's like, I think one of the biggest takeaways I have from the entire, past 15 years of my life is like, people just need to go the heck outdoors. Like what's so wild to me is that 93.5% of the 24-hour period for the average American is spent indoors now. So that's either in a car or a building. So we are these miraculous bipedal animals on the most spectacular planet in our solar system, and the most spectacular planet that we know of anywhere, actually. And we are choosing, like you said, to lock ourselves in cubicles, in prisons, and in our cubicle prisons in a chair that is even more of and then throw our hands up in confusion when everyone's getting sick and depressed. And I'm like, a big answer that I think could just help a lot of people is like literally take that 93.5% and move it down to 50% or 60%, because a lot of good is going to happen. Less air pollution outdoors. Obviously, you're going to have better circadian rhythms with the light. You're going to be breathing fresh air. You're going to be moving more. And I think a lot of people push back and say, well, it's impossible. I work indoors. And I'm like, Rome is burning. Let's get creative. Like, put a box on a picnic table outside and put your computer out there. Like I spend most of my time outdoors except when I'm doing podcasts, but it's like, we got to get creative, right? Like that is such, and I think getting back to our conversation about awe, nothing I think helps us feel more just like inherent awe than just being outdoors, because something subconscious happens where we realize there's something bigger than us. And our problems are not the only problems. And there is a fundamental harmony to the world that we have no control of, which is fundamentally beautiful and good. And there are seasons, and there are tides, and there are moon cycles, and there are clouds. And it's like, when you are only outdoors for 6% of the time, that all is forgotten. And in that forgetting, we become controllable, dependent, and fearful. And so, I think that there's just, it's like, go outside, lift something, walk. It's complicated, but it's not, And so I think that's kind of like one of the TLDRs I have from the book. The sort of like too long didn't read is go outside, move more, sleep. Some of the basics. But fortunately, we can track the impact of those things now and feel more motivated to commit to them. I think with some of the amazing technology that we have today that helps us feel confident in investing in some of the simple things.
Well, speaking of simple things, I want to congratulate you. Your book just hit #1 on the New York Times list.
Yeah.
Which is a really, really big honor. So your message is getting out there, and that's hard to do. And, I've been on the list multiple times. I don't think I've ever been #1. I've been like number 2 or something. So well done. And I'm really hoping that your book sustains there, because the more people who just understand, oh my God, you mean I can change my food and my environment and then I feel better and I perform better? Like, you're converting everyone into being biohackers, which means they have control over their own biology instead of being helpless, or even worse, giving someone else control without even thinking about it. So good for you. I'm really impressed with the way you've learned how to think about this, and the combination of your experience with your mom and your deep medical background, I think gives you a unique perspective on this. So very, very well done.
Thank you. You've been a longtime inspiration to me. And so this is not something I've done alone. I feel so much like one more torch carrier of a message that people like you and others in our amazing space have brought to the forefront. And I feel proud to be a part of that community. It's just, we need to just keep pushing it, because it's still not the full mainstream. And yet I think there are forces of light, and I think we're making progress.
It'll get there. And there are a lot of us working on this. And for every one of the influencers you see, there's usually some really good true believers. You're one of them. There's usually a few people who will copy anything so that they can make a buck. And they're usually the ones who sneak bad ingredients in. And, you're like, wait a minute, why is that person always, like doing the same thing as everyone else for cheaper? Like, and I see some of that out there, but for every one of the public influencer people like that, there are probably 10,000 people who are on board and are doing this. They're not influencers by design, probably because they want more peace in their life. So,
so true.
That's good. So we have the Upgrade Collective as the live studio audience. This is my mentorship group, right?
Yes.
And some of those people are in that group, and they're not out there posting very often, but they're curious and they're talking to their family and their friends, and that's how grassroots movements happen. And end of the day, when we do not buy fake industrial foods that taste just like real food, and we don't eat the cricket proteins, and we just stop doing the bad things, then the big companies, they can spend more money on marketing. Maybe it'll work, probably not. Our mitochondria work. They could try to use the force of government to restrict your access to foods. That won't work, because that would be the end of the government, because starving people tend to not be good citizens. So the only thing that's going to happen is they'll have to change the products they make so that they're the ones we'll buy.
That's right.
And all we need is some more awareness on that. And so I think you're doing more good than you think when you hit the number 1 on the New York Times list. So I hope you're really feeling a good sense of accomplishment there, because you've earned it.
Thank you. I feel good. I also feel like there's a lot of work to do. I feel like it's, there's more to do. And I think one thing on that note, like, I do believe that each person can have a monumental impact on their communities and their families. Although I do also just want to maybe leave people with something I hear a lot, is that people are, I think, sometimes afraid to share these thoughts with their families or their communities or their kids' schools, or to tell the Uber driver, hey, those artificial fragrances actually aren't good for our health, or to leave a review or whatever it is, or to tell, at their office building, hey, can we get these artificial scents out of the bathrooms? Like, I actually put a poll on Instagram, because I always post about the poison quote unquote air fresheners whenever I see them, which is every day now. And I asked people, how many of you hate these? And it was like 90%. How many of you would tell people, the business or whatever you're patroning who has that air freshener, that you would like it to be gone? And it was like 2% of people. So there's some delta between not liking what's out there and speaking up about it.
There's also direct action on that. So what I do is I tell the Uber driver, hey man, did you know that those things shrink your balls? And okay, you go to the level of vibration is, and like, what? And you go, no, really, this is called endocrine disruption. And they're throwing the little thing out. I'm like, don't throw it out the window, like put it in your glove box, right? And then in environments where there's one of those automatic sprayers in the bathroom, they're only attached to the wall with sticky tape or a tiny little screw. So I don't know, I've probably thrown away 200 or 300 of those. I'm cool enough to reach it. I'm like, why are they allowed to put that there? They're not.
It's literally biochemical warfare. It is. And I always say something, because I think what we need to realize is that there is nothing bad's going to happen. Literally. Like, the worst that's going to happen is that someone's not going to like you, which literally is to your benefit, right? Like, because you don't need people in your life who are like, And so this gets back again to chapter 9 of the book, fearlessness. Like, we need to realize that the more with good energy, so good vibe, you want to help make the world a higher vibration place, come at it with that energy, speak with love, but be clear with everyone around you, your kids' schools, the restaurants you patron, the buildings that you go to. You're the customer. Bring good energy to it. People might not like it, but we need to be more bold about speaking about these things. And a little bit of that, actually a lot of that, comes down to not being afraid, right? Because everyone's worried something bad's going to happen. And as someone, I don't know if you agree with this, but who's out there talking a lot about this stuff, it's like the more you actually live authentically with what you want and what you believe, it attracts people you want in your life. And it actually attracts, authenticity. Oh, yeah. And so just the call to action there is like, we all need to be speaking vocally about this stuff and not being afraid to call it out, because it makes a difference, and bad things are not going to happen. So, I just think that's something I'm always we need to be courageous. This is a time in history when we all need to be courageous.
Well, a final question for you. This one actually comes from the Upgrade Collective. And by the way, guys, ourupgradecollective.com if you'd like to be part of the conversation as I'm recording these. It comes from Todd, and he says, does biological fear drive failure to speak up? So are people not speaking up because they just don't have enough energy?
Wow. Beautiful question. I think it's bidirectional. I think there's two things happening. I think that our bodies being underpowered at scale, our life force being dimmed by our environment is impairing our boldness and making us weaker and more controllable, because we feel fearful and small, and we need, daddy system to help us. Yes, that's one direction. But even in a place of, being a little dimmed, which I think many of us have been, I certainly have been in my life, there is the opportunity for us to push through and let our thoughts be strong. And that can have a really positive downstream effect on the cells. So every moment, and I dealt with serious depression when I was metabolically ill in the past. And so at least knowing that if you can start with positive thoughts, cultivate awe, cultivate gratitude, cultivate a sense of possibility, it will be a virtuous cycle to our cells that will then continue that just like boomerang cycle of cells to thoughts, thoughts to cells, that is an upward spiral. And so, I think, we can control both a little bit, and then together they can be the strongest possible. So yes. And even if we're struggling, start with some really strong positive thoughts and just force yourself to not have the limiting, beliefs and kind of fake it until you make it. And that will have a really positive impact on your biology.
It sure does. And just that idea that you're not helpless. You just don't know what to do. That's an important thing. And I'm working on right now, taking all of the work, 1,200 podcasts and all the books and all the labs and all that, and putting it into an AI, so that instead of having to study for 2 years worth of college just for all the stuff I've published, plus all of your books, everyone else, I'll just tell us where you are, tell us where you want to go, and then I'll just tell you what to do. Like, this is the thing that's easiest, that costs the least money, that will give you the most energy back. And then let's start there. And that's going to be something I talk about at the conference, but it's a big initiative, but it's something that seems important because most people don't want to study to become doctors or biohackers or anything else. And if you did have enough time to do that, and you can have an AI do it for you, then you could take that extra time and become like a spiritual master and learn to like make the spaceship rise using the force or something. I mean, do something fun with all your spare time, right?
Love. I can't wait to help you share about that in whatever way I can. That's amazing.
Well, Casey, thank you for your work. Guys, go to Levels. Okay, was it levels.health? You guys,
levelshealth.com.
Oh, you changed it. See, it used to be levels.link because I've been working with you guys for so long. All right, so go to
that is probably still levels.link for yours, but the main website is levelshealth.com. But if you have a special one, it would be levels.link/Dave.
/Dave, yeah. Levels.link/Dave. To go to the front of the line, got to say that a lot as an investor, a true believer. I've worn Levels for like 2 years straight, and I do it on and off now. And it's one of those things that really matters. So guys, if you want to know what your metabolism is doing, go to levelshealth.com. And if you want to sign up for that stuff, levels.link/Dave. But more importantly, go wherever you like to buy books and pick up the book Good Energy. Because here's the deal. She's right. Making your mitochondria and your metabolism work right by any means necessary is the path to not suffering, not being sick, not being afraid, and to not having a sucky life. So do that by any means necessary, even if it means ignoring big daddy government or big daddy pharma or whatever else. And you do you. And you'll probably like what happens. And if you don't do it, you probably won't like what happens. It's your choice.
Thank you so much, Dave.
You're listening to The Human Upgrade with Dave Asprey.